I hired a man to fix the yard. He called me. I hear a child crying. Enjoy my new story.
The landscaper I hired to clear my backyard called me 7 times in 40 minutes. When I finally picked up, he asked if anyone else was in my house. I said no. My daughter was at her father's for the weekend. He went quiet for a second too long. Then he said he could hear a child crying from somewhere below my yard, from my basement, and it wasn't a TV. My name is Aria. I'm 31 years old. I work as a billing specialist at Dr. Whitfield's pediatric dental office in Flemington, New Jersey. I file insurance claims, chase down overdue accounts, and spend my lunch breaks eating leftovers I packed at 6 in the morning because buying a sandwich every day is $7 I don't have. I've been divorced for 14 months, and I have a 6-year-old daughter named Phoebe who is my entire universe. My ex-husband, Troy Linden, is the reason I eat those leftovers. When we went through the divorce, Troy showed up to court in wrinkled khakis and a shirt that looked like it had been ironed by someone who'd never seen an iron before. His lawyer told the judge Troy was barely getting by, working part-time at Hartwell Flooring Distributors for $14.50 an hour, maybe 25 hours a week. The judge looked at the numbers and gave me the house, which sounds generous until you realize the house came with a $1,340 monthly mortgage, a furnace that made sounds like a dying animal every November, and a backyard that could have been featured on a nature documentary about what happens when humans give up. I also got $411 a month in child support. Troy kept his freedom and apparently his ability to sleep at night. For 14 months, I've been choosing between fixing things, furnace or brakes or groceries, groceries or Phoebe's field trip. Last month, her school asked for $45 for a trip to the Liberty Science Center. I had $51 in checking. I wrote the check and ate rice for a week. That's not a metaphor, that's a meal plan. But here's the thing that always nagged at me. Every time Troy dropped Phoebe off after his weekends, she'd be wearing new sneakers or a jacket I didn't buy, or she'd mention they went to Friendly's for ice cream. Little things, nothing dramatic. Just enough to make me wonder how a man making $18,000 a year was living better than I was on 38. I told myself I was overthinking it. Told myself maybe he was just better with money, which looking back is like saying maybe the fox is just better at counting chickens. Anyway, the yard. My backyard looked like nature was staging a hostile takeover. The hedges were dead. The fence was leaning like it had given up on life. There was something growing near the shed that I'm fairly certain was developing its own ecosystem. I'd been meaning to deal with it for over a year, and I finally decided that this Saturday, Phoebe was at Troy's for his custody weekend, I was going to hire someone and get it done. My coworker Nina recommended a guy named Garrett Novak. He showed up that morning in a mud-splattered Chevy Colorado with a trailer full of equipment and hands that looked like they'd been shaking hands with dirt for 30 years. Solid guy, no small talk, just pointed at the yard and said he'd have an estimate by the time he finished his coffee. I liked him immediately. I showed Garrett the full disaster, gave him the house key for the bathroom, and headed to the ShopRite on Route 202 for groceries. My phone went into my purse on silent. I don't like shopping with distractions. I need to focus. Grocery shopping on my budget is basically a math competition with emotional consequences. I was loading bags into my trunk when I finally checked my phone. 7 missed calls. Same number, 40 minutes. My stomach dropped before my brain even caught up. I called back. Garrett answered on the first ring, and his voice had that careful tone people use when they're trying not to scare you. He asked if anyone else was supposed to be in my house. I said no. He asked about the basement. I said, what about the basement? And then he told me he'd been working near the bulkhead. That's the exterior entrance on the side of the house that leads down to the back section of the basement. He heard crying, muffled but real. A child. Not a cat, not a TV, not pipes making noise. A child. He called me twice, got no answer, and then called 911. Then he kept calling me. The police were already on their way. I drove home so fast, I'm surprised I still have a license. Now I need to explain something about my basement, because otherwise the next part won't make sense. It's a full unfinished basement. Concrete walls, concrete floor, the works. The interior stairs from my kitchen go down to the front section where my laundry, water heater, and breaker panel are. That's the part I use. 3-4 times a week. Throw in laundry, flip a breaker when the microwave trips it, done. The back section is on the other side of a concrete support wall near the bulkhead entrance. After the divorce, I shoved all of Troy's leftover boxes and my own unpacked stuff back there, stacked them against the walls like a cardboard fortress. I hadn't set foot in that section in 14 months. There was no reason to. It was a dead zone full of things I didn't want to look at from a life I didn't want to remember. When I pulled up to my house, there was already a police cruiser in the driveway. Garrett was standing in the yard, arms crossed, looking relieved to see me. The officers had opened the bulkhead, which I'd assumed was rusted shut. It wasn't. Someone had put a newer padlock on the outside. Not my padlock. We went down the bulkhead stairs, past the stacked boxes, and behind them, in the back corner of my own basement, someone had rearranged everything to create a hidden space, a portable crib, a diaper bag, a playmat with toys, sippy cups on a small folding table, and sitting in that crib, face red and streaked with tears, was a toddler, a little boy, maybe 18 months old. I had never seen this child in my life. My hands were shaking so hard I had to press them against my legs to make them stop. One of the officers asked if I knew whose child this was. I couldn't speak. Then I looked at the diaper bag. There was a monogram tag stitched into the strap, CL, and tucked in the front pocket a business card for a pediatrician, Dr. Roshan Mehta, Raritan Family Care. CL. My ex-husband's last name is Linden. While the officers called it in and paramedics checked the boy, I stood in my own basement trying to process something my brain absolutely refused to accept. Someone had been bringing a child into my house, regularly, secretly, through an entrance I never used, into a section I never visited, while I was at work earning $38,000 a year and counting pennies. And then I heard a car door slam outside. I walked up the bulkhead stairs into the daylight, and there she was, walking across my side yard toward the bulkhead like she'd done it 100 times before. Lenore Linden, Troy's mother, 61 years old, carrying a pharmacy bag and a bottle of Gatorade. She saw the police cruiser and she stopped. She saw me and her face went through about 7 emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, fear, and then, this is the part that still makes my blood pressure spike, annoyance, like I was the inconvenience, and I thought, what have you been doing in my house? Before we continue, please hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single one, and your support means the world to me. So, Lenore Linden was standing in my yard, holding a pharmacy bag and a Gatorade, staring at the police car in my driveway like it had personally offended her. The officers brought her to the side and started asking questions. I stood about 10 feet away, close enough to hear everything. Lenore wasn't aggressive. She wasn't hostile. She was flustered, worried, but not about being caught, about the baby. Her first words were about Cody. Is he okay? Where is he? I was only gone for 45 minutes. 45 minutes. She left an 18-month-old alone in a basement for 45 minutes. Here's what came out in the next hour, piece by piece, like pulling threads from a sweater that turned out to be holding the whole thing together. Lenore explained that she'd been watching the boy during weekdays for the past 5 months. She said she started feeling dizzy that morning, lightheaded, maybe a blood pressure spike. She drove herself to the urgent care on Route 12, about 2 miles away. She thought it would be quick. Cody was asleep in the crib. She figured she'd be back in 15-20 minutes. But the urgent care was packed, and the wait stretched to almost an hour. By the time she got out, bought a Gatorade, and drove back, the police were already there. I'll give her this. She wasn't lying about the medical part. The officers confirmed she had a receipt from the urgent care with a timestamp, so she didn't just wander off to get her nails done. She had a real scare, made a bad judgment call, and it blew up. But that context doesn't change the core fact. She'd been entering my home without my knowledge for 5 months. She had a key, Troy's old bulkhead key, the one he was supposed to return after the divorce and never did. It was right there on her keyring between her car key and her ShopRite loyalty card. 5 months of access to my house, 3 to 4 times a week, and I never knew. She came when I was at work. She left before I got home, and she'd been using the back section of my basement, the section I never visited, as a daycare. The officers pressed further. If her usual routine was weekdays only, why was she here on a Saturday? Lenore explained that Sabrina had picked up an extra shift at the car dealership that morning. Troy had Phoebe for the custody weekend and couldn't handle both kids at once, so Lenore came on a Saturday for the first time. She figured I'd be out running errands, which I was. She didn't know I'd hired someone to work in the backyard 10 feet from the bulkhead. When the officers asked why she didn't just watch the baby at her own home, Lenore got quiet for a moment. She lives at Copper Ridge, a 55-plus community off Route 523. Strict lease. No children under 18 allowed as residents or regular guests. She couldn't bring a toddler there multiple days a week without the HOA turning into the FBI, so she used my basement instead. In her mind, the house was empty during the day. She set up a clean little area. She was careful. She didn't go into the rest of the house. She treated it like borrowing a parking spot nobody was using. You know what? I've heard of creative babysitting solutions, but turning your ex-daughter-in-law's basement into an unlicensed daycare has to be a new personal best. The officers identified the child through the pediatrician's card in the diaper bag. Cody Linden, 18 months old, son of Troy Linden and Sabrina Voss. They called Troy. And this is the moment where I had to lean against my own house to keep standing, because my brain was doing math it didn't want to do. Cody was 18 months old. That means he was conceived about 27 months ago. My divorce was finalized 14 months ago. The proceedings started about 6 months before that, 20 months ago, which means Sabrina Voss was pregnant while Troy and I were still technically married, while we were still sitting across from each other at the kitchen table some nights, having those awful quiet dinners where neither person says what they're really thinking, while he was showing up to court in his wrinkled khakis, pretending to be broke. He had an entire second life growing inside another woman, and he sat across from a judge and cried poor. I thought finding a baby in my basement was the worst part of this day. Turns out, it was just the opening act. Troy showed up about an hour later. And here's what scared me more than the basement, more than the baby, more than any of it. He was calm, completely, perfectly calm. No panic, no guilt, no anger. He talked to the officers like he was discussing a delayed package delivery. Friendly, measured, reasonable. He explained that his mother was babysitting his son. She had a medical episode. It was an unfortunate situation, but not a dangerous one. He signed the paperwork. Cody was released to him. He's the biological father, no abuse allegations, so that's how it works in New Jersey. CPS opened an investigation, but the baby went home with Troy that evening. Before he left, Troy looked at me. Just once, a slight nod, like we were two neighbors who'd had a minor disagreement about a fence line. That nod was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen, because it told me everything about how his mind worked. In Troy's world, this was a manageable inconvenience, not a crisis, not a reckoning, just a wrinkle to be smoothed. I've met car salesmen with more visible guilt. CPS didn't close the file, though. A child had been left alone in a space that wasn't a home, wasn't a licensed facility, wasn't anywhere that a toddler should be unsupervised. Lenore would face scrutiny. The investigation would continue. Then Dolores showed up. Dolores Kijek, 74 years old, my next-door neighbor, the woman I should have listened to 5 months ago. She came across her lawn carrying a composition notebook, like she was delivering evidence to a grand jury, which, emotionally speaking, she was. She told me twice. Twice, she mentioned seeing a woman going around the side of my house during weekday afternoons. Twice I waved it off. A meter reader, a delivery person, whatever. Dolores didn't wave things off. Dolores documented them. After I brushed her off the second time, she started keeping a written log. Dates, times, descriptions. Tuesday, 8:17 a.m. Older woman, gray sedan, car seat visible in back, walked to side yard, did not use front door. Entry after entry after entry. She also had Ring doorbell camera footage from her own front door, which had a partial view of my side yard. The footage showed Lenore arriving and leaving like clockwork. Car seat going in, car seat coming out. For months. Dolores stood in my yard and handed me the notebook without a word. Well, almost without a word. She looked at me and said, very gently, "I tried to tell you, sweetheart, twice. Honestly, That hurt almost as much as the rest of it, because she was right. That night, Phoebe was still at Troy's. I was alone in the house. I called my mother, Francine, because when your world falls apart, you call your mom, even when your mom is Francine Berger. My mother has many wonderful qualities. Gentle first reactions are not one of them. Her first words, before "Are you okay?" before "That's terrible," before anything resembling comfort were, "How did you not know, Aria? How did you not check your own basement?" Mothers, they have this incredible ability to find the one thing you're already beating yourself up about and highlight it like it's on a billboard. She wasn't wrong, though, and that was the worst part. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my dryer, the one in the front section of the basement, my section, the normal section, and stared at the concrete wall separating me from the space I didn't know existed in my own home. And I started doing different math, not the painful kind about when Sabrina got pregnant, the financial kind. If Troy was really making $18,800 a year, if he was really that broke, that struggling, then how was he affording diapers, formula, a pediatrician, rent with Sabrina, gas, food for 2 adults and a baby, and $411 a month to me? The numbers didn't add up. They had never added up. I just never had a reason to pull out the calculator until now. Sitting on that dryer at 2 in the morning, I decided I was done being the woman who didn't check. Monday morning, I called in late to work for the first time in 3 years. Nina Sorensen, my coworker, was the first person at the office I told. Nina is the kind of friend who doesn't waste time on sympathy when action is available. She listened to the whole story, then said 4 words. Call my cousin Bridget. Bridget Calloway, family law attorney, Somerville, New Jersey. By 10 o'clock that morning, I was sitting across from her in an office that smelled like coffee and old paper, watching her fill a legal pad with notes while I talked. Bridget wore reading glasses on a chain and had the kind of focus that made you feel like your problems were finally in competent hands. When I finished, the basement, the baby, Troy's calm little nod, Lenore's key, the math that didn't add up, Bridget set down her pen, took off her glasses, and said something that rearranged my entire understanding of the next few months. She said, "This isn't just about your basement. This is about what your ex-husband told a judge under oath." I felt something crack open in my chest when she said that. Not pain, more like a window in a room that had been sealed shut for 14 months, fresh air I didn't even know I needed. Bridget laid out the situation clearly. If Troy had misrepresented his income during the divorce proceedings, the child support order could be reopened. Depending on the scale of the deception, potentially the entire settlement. The basement situation was alarming on its own, but it was also a doorway, because the existence of a secret second child, a girlfriend, and a regular child care arrangement all pointed to a man living well above his declared means. That doesn't prove fraud by itself, but it's a very good reason to start looking. And Bridget knew exactly who to call to start looking. Walt Treadway, forensic accountant, semi-retired, the kind of man who wears suspenders not as a fashion statement, but because he's been wearing them since 1987 and sees no reason to stop. Walt got excited about financial records the way birdwatchers get excited about a rare warbler in the backyard. His eyes lit up, his voice got faster, and he started asking questions I didn't even understand yet. I liked him immediately. Something about a man who finds his joy in other people's hidden money felt cosmically appropriate for my situation. Walt didn't need a spy movie to find Troy's secrets. He started where any good forensic accountant starts, with public records. He went to the New Jersey Division of Revenue's online business registry, typed in Linden, and there it was, Linden Clean LLC, registered in Bound Brook, New Jersey. Owner, Lenore Linden. Registered agent, Troy Linden. Registered agent. That's a person designated to receive legal and official documents on behalf of a business. Troy had listed himself because the form required it, and because he never in a million years expected that anyone involved in a family court case would search state business filings. It's one of those details that lives in the most boring corner of public records, where almost nobody looks. Almost. Walt looked. Linden Clean was a coin-operated laundry business. Troy's late father had started it years ago, and Lenore technically owned it. But the financial trail told a different story. Walt subpoenaed bank records through Bridget. The business revenue had tripled in 2 years. There were now 34 machines across the original Bound Brook location, and the cash flow was significant. Regular deposits from Lyndon Clean's business account into Troy's personal checking, $2,500 here, $3,000 there. Patterns consistent with a cash-heavy laundromat operation, where someone is paying themselves generously. And then there was Troy's real job. His W-2 from Hartwell Flooring Distributors showed a full-time position at $27 an hour. Not part-time, not $14.50, full-time with overtime, pulling in roughly $70,000 a year. The man who showed up to court looking like he couldn't afford a decent shirt was making $70,000 from his day job alone. Add the laundromat cash, another $35,000 to $40,000 a year, and Troy Lyndon's real income was somewhere between $105,000 and $110,000 annually. He told the court he made $18,800. I want you to sit with that number for a second. The difference between $18,000 and $110,000 isn't a rounding error. That's not fudging a few numbers. That's an entire life hidden behind a pair of wrinkled khakis. You know that feeling when you've been swimming against a current for so long that you forgot what still water feels like? And then one day the current just stops, and you realize how exhausted you actually are? That's what sitting in Bridget's office felt like when Walt showed me those numbers. I wasn't happy yet. I wasn't celebrating. I was just still. For the first time in 14 months, the current had stopped pulling. But Walt wasn't done, because Walt is the kind of man who finds one trail and then checks if there are others. He noticed that Lenore was receiving $800 a month from the Lyndon Clean business account. Troy told his mother that was her fair share, that the laundromat barely broke even, and $800 was the best he could do. Lenore never questioned it. She trusted her son. She didn't look at the books because Troy handled everything, and he was her boy. And why would your own child lie to you about something like that? I'll tell you why. Because Troy Lyndon didn't just lie to one person. He lied to all of them. The court, his mother, his girlfriend, me. Each lie was tailored, specific, and designed to keep that person in exactly the right amount of darkness. He gave the court poverty. He gave his mother just enough to feel included. He gave Sabrina a comfortable life without the details. And he gave me $411 and a house with a broken furnace. I went to visit Dolores that week, sat at her kitchen table and asked to see everything. She produced the composition notebook like a librarian producing a first edition. Every entry dated, timed, detailed. Wednesday, 8:22 a.m. Same gray sedan. Woman entered through side yard carrying car seat and canvas bag. Departed 3:47 p.m. She had Ring doorbell footage on her phone organized by date. She had photos taken from her kitchen window of Lenore's car in the driveway, with the car seat visible through the back window. 5 months of documentation that would make most private investigators jealous. When I thanked her, Dolores just straightened her glasses and said she watches a lot of true crime shows. Apparently, it pays off. Bridget reviewed Dolores's file and called it the best unofficial surveillance work she'd seen in 20 years of practice. Between Walt's financials and Dolores's logs, the case was building itself. My mother called that week too. Francine had moved past the initial "how did you not know" phase and entered the guilt about saying that phase, which in Francine language means aggressive helpfulness. She wanted to come over. She wanted to clean the basement. She wanted to change every lock in the house. She wanted to call a lawyer she'd seen on a commercial during the 11 o'clock news. A guy named something like Rick Justice or Brent Power, one of those names that sounds like a character from an action movie. I told her I already had a lawyer, a real one, with a forensic accountant who wears suspenders and gets excited about spreadsheets. Francine wasn't sure about the suspenders part, but she approved of the general direction. Then, on a Wednesday evening, Bridget called me at home. Her voice had that particular energy, controlled but electric, that I was starting to recognize as the sound of Walt finding something. He'd found something. The bank records didn't just show deposits from Lyndon Clean. There was a second source of cash deposits from a different business account, registered under a slightly different name. Lyndon Fresh, LLC. registered in Manville, New Jersey. A second laundromat opened 8 months ago, entirely funded with cash. Lenore's name was nowhere on it. This one was registered to a holding entity that Walt was still tracing, but the deposit patterns into Troy's account were unmistakable. Troy hadn't just been running his father's old laundromat on the side. He'd been expanding, building. A second location, a shadow business, invisible to the court, invisible to his mother, invisible to everyone. The man was constructing an empire out of quarters and deception, and he'd been doing it while I clipped coupons and cried in parking lots. When Bridget told me, I was standing in my kitchen holding a spatula because I'd been making scrambled eggs for dinner. Just eggs, because eggs are cheap, and I was tired. I remember looking at those eggs and thinking, this man has 2 laundromats and I'm eating eggs for dinner. And then I started laughing. Not because it was funny, because the lie was so enormous, so perfectly engineered, that my brain couldn't process it as tragedy anymore. It had crossed into absurdity. He was making over $100,000 a year and had convinced a judge he couldn't afford to pay me more than $411 a month. Bridget let me laugh. Then she said, "We have everything we need. It's time to file." By the 3rd week after that Saturday, I had a forensic accountant who wore suspenders and a lawyer who smelled blood in the water. What I didn't have yet was the full picture. Turns out Troy's lies had layers like a bad lasagna. Every time you peeled one back, there was another one underneath, somehow worse than the last. Walt Treadway's discovery of Linden Fresh, the second laundromat in Manville, changed the scope of everything. Linden Clean in Bound Brook was the family business, started by Troy's late father, technically owned by Lenore. That one at least had a history. Linden Fresh was different. It was opened 8 months ago, funded with cash, and Lenore's name wasn't on it at all. Troy had set it up through a separate LLC, registered to a holding entity that Walt eventually traced back to, surprise, Troy himself, using a slightly different version of his legal name and a P.O. box for the business address instead of a home address. He'd been careful. I'll give him that. Troy wasn't some sloppy guy leaving receipts in his jacket pocket. He paid cash wherever he could, kept separate accounts, and used his mother's name as a shield for the original business while building the second one entirely in the shadows. If it weren't for the fact that his mother got dizzy in my basement on a Saturday morning, nobody would have looked at any of this. His whole system was designed to be invisible, and it almost was. Almost is a beautiful word when it's working in your favor. Bridget built the case file like a woman constructing a brick wall. Methodical, precise, every piece placed exactly where it needed to be. Troy's real W-2 from Hartwell Flooring showing full-time employment at $27 an hour versus the part-time at $14.50 story he'd given the court. Walt's forensic analysis of both laundromat operations, revenue streams, cash deposits, the pattern of transfers into Troy's personal account. The New Jersey Division of Revenue filings showing Troy as registered agent for Linden Clean and the sole organizer of Linden Fresh, LLC. Dolores Kijek's surveillance notebook and Ring doorbell footage documenting 5 months of Lenore's visits. The CPS investigation report. Every piece connected to the next like a chain that was slowly wrapping around Troy's carefully constructed story and squeezing. You know, there's something almost poetic about a man who built his deception on cash from laundromats being taken down by paperwork. All those quarters, and he couldn't buy his way out of a spreadsheet. Around week 4, something happened that I did not expect. And honestly, it was the twist that changed my understanding of Troy more than anything else. CPS was still investigating the basement situation. That process was separate from my civil case, running on its own track. As part of their standard procedure, investigators interviewed Sabrina Voss. She was cooperative, calm, answered their questions about Cody's care routine, the arrangement with Lenore, household details, standard stuff. But during one of these interviews, the investigator mentioned Troy's income as declared in our divorce, $18,800 a year. Sabrina went quiet because Sabrina didn't know that number. She knew Troy made decent money. She lived with him. They had a nice enough apartment in Raritan. They went out to eat. Troy's truck was a 2021 Ram with leather seats. Their life wasn't lavish, but it wasn't $18,000 a year either. Sabrina had never seen the divorce filings. She wasn't part of those proceedings. When she asked Troy about it back when they first got together, he told her the divorce was handled. He paid support. Arya got the house. End of story. She had no reason to dig deeper until a CPS investigator casually mentioned a number that didn't match the life she was living. I want to be honest here. Part of me expected Sabrina to be a villain in this story. The other woman, the one who helped Troy hide everything. But that's not what happened, and I think the truth is more interesting than the version I had in my head. Sabrina didn't know about the financial fraud. She wasn't in on it. She was just another person Troy had given exactly the amount of information he wanted her to have, and nothing more. When Sabrina realized what Troy had told the court, two things clicked in her head almost simultaneously. First, the man she was raising a child with was a much more skilled liar than she'd understood. Second, if this whole thing unraveled, and it was unraveling, she could be perceived as a knowing participant. She'd been living with Troy, sharing expenses, benefiting from money that should have been going to his first child's support. She could look complicit even though she wasn't. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. Sabrina started cooperating with the CPS investigators, not to help me, not out of guilt, not because she suddenly felt sisterly solidarity. She did it to establish a clear record that she didn't know. She provided bank statements showing their shared household expenses. She confirmed that Troy ran both laundromat locations, that he left early, came home smelling like detergent and dryer sheets, handled maintenance calls on weekends. She confirmed his full-time schedule at Hartwell. She gave investigators details that supported what Walt was already finding in the financial records. Troy had built his deception on the assumption that the people around him would stay in their assigned roles, his mother as the grateful caretaker, Sabrina as the trusting girlfriend, me as the struggling ex-wife who'd never fight back. He never planned for what would happen if all three of us saw the full picture at the same time. That was his one miscalculation. Bridget told me something around this time that stuck with me. She said most financial fraud in divorce cases doesn't get caught through dramatic revelations or smoking guns. It gets caught because liars have to keep too many stories straight for too many people, and eventually, someone compares notes. Troy's whole system depended on isolation, keeping each person in their own little bubble of half-truths. The basement broke those bubbles open, and now everything was leaking into everything else. In the meantime, I had the hardest job of all, acting normal. Bridget was clear about this. Do not confront Troy. Do not mention lawyers, evidence, investigations, or forensic accountants. Do not change your behavior during custody exchanges. Let him think the basement situation is being handled as a minor CPS matter and nothing more. Let him believe his system is still intact. So every other Friday, Troy pulled up in his Ram truck, and Phoebe ran out to him with her overnight bag, and I stood on the porch and waved and said, "Have a good weekend," like my entire legal strategy wasn't built on destroying the life he thought he was protecting. I smiled at a man I knew was lying to a degree that made my stomach turn, and I let him drive away with my daughter, thinking he'd gotten away with it. Those Friday evenings were the loneliest moments of this whole ordeal. Worse than the basement, worse than the math. Just me and the performance of normalcy, standing on a porch in Flemington, waving. Around week 5, Sabrina's early attempt to reach out resurfaced in a different light. Before she'd learned the truth about the court filings, back during the first week of the CPS investigation, she had sent me a Facebook message. It was carefully worded, almost certainly coached by Troy. "I know this situation was handled badly, and I'm sorry your home was involved. Troy says everything is being worked out. I hope we can keep things from getting more complicated than they need to be." Friendly on the surface, but I could hear Troy's fingerprints all over those words. I'd screenshotted it and sent it to Bridget the day I received it. Bridget filed it. Everything was getting filed. I started putting $25 a week into a savings account during this period, not because it made any real financial difference, because I needed to feel like I was building something instead of just enduring something. $25 a week is nothing and everything. It was the first money I'd saved in over a year, my own private act of faith that things were about to change. At week 8, Bridget filed the motion, a petition to modify child support based on newly discovered evidence of concealed income. The discovery package, Walt's forensic analysis, the business registrations, the W-2 comparisons, Sabrina's statements, Dolores's documentation, the CPS reports, was sent to Troy's attorney, a man named Howard Pruitt, who I'd later learn had a reputation for being competent but unenthusiastic, the kind of lawyer who does his job the way some people do yard work, more adequately, without passion. Bridget told me what would happen next. She said his lawyer is going to read this file, and the first thing he's going to do is call me. And his first words will be about settling this before a hearing. That's how you know the file did its job. 3 days later, Howard Pruitt called Bridget's office. His first words, "Can we discuss resolving this before we get to a hearing?" I was at my desk at Dr. Whitfield's office when Bridget texted me the update. I stared at my screen for a full minute. Then I went back to filing an insurance claim for a kid who needed a crown on a baby tooth, because that's the thing about fighting for your life. You still have to do your actual job while it's happening. Howard Pruitt's first offer came through exactly 1 week after he received the evidence package. Troy was willing to increase child support to $900 a month and pay $5,000 in retroactive adjustment. That was it, $900 and $5,000. As if the difference between $18,000 and $110,000 could be smoothed over with a handshake and some rounding. Bridget called me from her office. I could hear something in her voice. Not frustration, more like professional amusement, the quiet kind that comes from having seen this play out before. She said the offer wasn't serious. It was a temperature check. Troy and Howard wanted to see how much we actually knew and how hard we'd push. Bridget rejected it and didn't counter. She said sometimes the most powerful move is to say no and say nothing else. Let them sit in the silence and wonder what's coming. I spent that week trying to focus on work, on Phoebe's school routine, on normal life. But my brain kept circling back to that number, $900. Troy's first instinct, even when caught, was to lowball. Even facing evidence of $110,000 in real income, his opening move was to offer me less than 1% of what he'd hidden. Some habits run deep, I guess. I started thinking about the fact that I have a jar in my kitchen where I keep loose change, quarters, dimes, whatever falls out of pockets. In 14 months, that jar had collected about $47. Troy was making $40,000 a year in quarters from laundromats. We were both collecting coins. The difference was that his coins paid for a boat, and mine paid for a jar of pennies on the counter that Phoebe likes to shake like a maraca. Round 2 came the following week. Howard proposed $1,200 a month with $10,000 retroactive. Better, but still not close. Bridget responded this time, not with a counteroffer, but with a detailed summary of Walt's full forensic analysis, both laundromat locations, the exact cash flow figures, the gap between declared and actual income laid out in clean columns with dates and amounts. She also included a single sentence at the bottom of her letter that Bridget later told me she'd been waiting to write for 3 weeks. My client is prepared to present this evidence in a hearing. We are also prepared to discuss the perjury implications with the court at that time. Perjury. That word carries weight. Lying under oath about your income in a divorce proceeding isn't just a civil matter, it's a criminal one. If this went to a hearing and the judge saw the full picture, a referral to the county prosecutor was almost guaranteed. Howard Pruitt knew that, and now Troy knew it too. Bridget told me that after she sent the forensic summary, there was a full week of silence from Howard's office. No calls, no emails, no counter. Just quiet. She said that was a good sign. It meant Howard was having a very serious conversation with his client about exactly how bad this could get. Troy was used to controlling information, controlling people, but you can't control a forensic accountant's spreadsheet. Numbers don't negotiate. Numbers just sit there and tell the truth, which is something Troy hadn't done in years. During that quiet week, Lenore's criminal case resolved separately. She was charged with criminal trespass and child endangerment for the basement arrangement. Her attorney negotiated the endangerment charge down. The medical circumstances helped. She'd had a documented dizzy spell, went to urgent care, had a receipt with a timestamp. She didn't abandon Cody maliciously. She made a terrible judgment call during a medical scare. The court took that into account. Lenore pleaded to criminal trespass, 18 months probation, a restraining order keeping her away from my property, and a criminal record at 61 years old for the first time in her life because her son put her in a position where helping her grandchild meant breaking the law. I didn't feel good about Lenore's situation, and I want to be honest about that. I didn't feel sorry for her either. She entered my home without permission for 5 months, but I understood in a way I wished I didn't, that Lenore was another person Troy had used. He gave her the key, the access, the arrangement. He let her believe she was helping the family. He just didn't mention that the help involved trespassing or that the money he could have spent on real daycare was sitting in his personal account, growing like a weed. Lenore's probation meant she couldn't come within 500 feet of my house. For context, that's longer than the distance she drove to the urgent care that started all of this. I'm not sure she appreciated the irony, but I did. Week 13. Howard Pruitt called Bridget again. His tone had shifted entirely. Bridget could hear it immediately. No more testing, no more lowballs. Troy was ready to discuss real numbers. They went back and forth over several days. Bridget pushed for 3 things: modified child support that reflected Troy's actual income, full retroactive adjustment for 14 months of underpayment, and an equitable redistribution from the hidden business income that should have been part of the original divorce settlement. Troy pushed back through Howard on every point, but each pushback got weaker, because the alternative, a full hearing where everything went on the public record, followed almost certainly by a perjury referral, was worse than any number Bridget was asking for. Troy was negotiating against a clock, and he knew it. The final consent order was signed in week 14. Both lawyers agreed to terms. The judge reviewed and approved it, and it was done. Modified child support, $1,740 a month going forward, calculated from Troy's actual income, the way it should have been from the beginning. Retroactive adjustment, $18,606. That's the difference between the $411 he'd been paying and what he should have been paying, multiplied by 14 months. He owed that immediately. Equitable redistribution, $37,500. My share of the Linden Clean and Linden Fresh business income that had been hidden during the original divorce proceedings, payable in installments from business revenue over 18 months. Total financial shift, approximately $56,000 in my direction, plus the ongoing increased support. I got the news from Bridget on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk at Dr. Whitfield's office, between a rejected insurance claim and a phone call I needed to return about a billing discrepancy. Bridget called and told me the judge had signed the order. She read me the numbers. She asked if I had questions. I said I'd call her back. Then I hung up, walked to the bathroom, closed the door, and cried for about 10 minutes. Not from sadness, not even from joy, exactly. From release. 14 months of pressure. The counting, the choosing, the pretending, the rice dinners, the crying in parking lots, all of it had been pressing down on me so steadily and for so long that I'd stopped noticing the weight, and then it lifted, and my body didn't know what to do except let go of everything it had been holding. I washed my face, went back to my desk, and finished the billing discrepancy call. Because life doesn't pause for catharsis. You just carry it with you into the next task and try not to let your voice shake. The county prosecutor received the perjury referral that same week. Troy now faced potential criminal charges for lying under oath about his income. Even if he eventually negotiated a plea to avoid jail time, the referral alone was a permanent mark. A public record that Troy Linden had been caught lying to a court about money while his 6-year-old daughter's mother skipped lunches to afford field trips. That evening, I picked Phoebe up from after-school care. She climbed into the back seat, buckled herself in, she's very proud of doing that on her own, and asked me why I was smiling. I told her I just had a good day at work. She said that was nice and asked if we could have pasta for dinner instead of eggs. I said yes. We could have pasta. The first retroactive check cleared on a Friday, $18,606, deposited into the same checking account that had $51 in it the month Phoebe needed field trip money. I looked at the number on my banking app and couldn't even process it as real for about 3 hours. I kept refreshing the page like it might disappear. It didn't disappear. I paid off my credit card first. $4,200 at 22.9% APR, a balance I'd been carrying for 11 months, making minimum payments that barely covered the interest. Watching the number refuse to shrink like it was mocking me. Gone. One payment, done. You know that feeling when you take off shoes that have been too tight all day? It was like that, but for my entire financial existence. Then the furnace. I'd been nursing that furnace through 2 winters with duct tape, prayers, and a space heater in Phoebe's room as backup. The repair guy, a man named Stu from a company in Reddington, looked at it and said the nicest thing anyone had said to me in months. "Ma'am, we can fix this properly. Not a patch, not a workaround, a real fix." I almost hugged Stu. I did not hug Stu, because Stu was holding a wrench. But the impulse was there. The car was next. My transmission had been making a sound that I can only describe as mechanical suffering, a grinding whine that got worse on hills and completely disappeared when I turned the radio up, which was my primary repair strategy for 8 months. The real fix cost $1,400. I paid it without calculating how many lunches I'd need to skip to cover it. That calculation, the one that used to run automatically in my head every time I spent money, just stopped. Not because I was rich, because I was no longer doing math to survive. I started Phoebe's college fund, $150 a month into a 529 plan. It's not going to pay for Harvard, but it exists. It's real. It has her name on it. And every month it grows a little, which is more than I could say about anything in our lives for the past 14 months. I want to be clear about something. I didn't become wealthy. I didn't buy a new car or take a vacation or redecorate the house from top to bottom. What I became was stable. I became a woman who could buy brand name cereal instead of the store brand bag that tastes like cardboard with ambition. I became a woman who could say yes to the field trip, yes to the pasta, yes to the repair, without that cold knot forming in my stomach. Stability isn't glamorous, but when you've lived without it, it feels like the biggest luxury in the world. The redistribution payments from the laundromat revenue started coming in monthly installments after that, $37,500 spread over 18 months. Each deposit was another small confirmation that the system had finally done what it was supposed to do. Troy's world contracted quietly, and I'll keep this brief because his story isn't the point. Mine is. The perjury referral hung over him like weather he couldn't outrun. Sabrina left within 2 months of the consent order being signed. Not in a blowout, not with screaming. She packed methodically over a weekend while Troy was at work, took Cody, and moved to a 1-bedroom in Edison. She told the CPS investigator in her final interview that she couldn't build a life with someone whose first instinct in every situation was to lie. I heard that secondhand through Bridget. I never spoke to Sabrina directly. We weren't friends. We weren't enemies. We were just 2 women who'd made the mistake of trusting the same man. Lenore stopped speaking to Troy after she found out, through the legal proceedings, just how much money Linden Clean was actually generating. $800 a month. He'd been paying his own mother $800 a month from a business her husband built, while pocketing tens of thousands. The laundromat still operated, but the family trust that held them together was gone. Some machines run fine without maintenance for a while, but eventually everything that's neglected breaks down. I imagine Troy understood that better than most, given that neglect was kind of his specialty. I had the bulkhead entrance properly sealed. New steel door, new deadbolt, my key only. A locksmith from Clinton did the work and didn't ask questions, which I appreciated because my ex-mother-in-law was running an underground daycare in my basement isn't a story you want to tell twice. Then I cleaned out the back section, took out the crib, the toys, the diaper bag, all of it. Scrubbed the floor, hauled away the boxes I'd been avoiding for 14 months. Troy's old stuff. My unpacked baggage from the divorce, all the things I'd shoved into the dark because I didn't have the energy to deal with them. I put down a rug I found at a consignment shop in Lambertville, dark blue, slightly worn, perfectly fine, set up a secondhand armchair and a floor lamp, added a small bookshelf. Phoebe found it before I even told her about it. She went downstairs to explore, her word, and came back up with her eyes wide and declared it the cozy room. She started doing her homework down there, reading her library books. She'd bring a blanket, curl up in the armchair, and disappear for an hour. The space that had been used without my knowledge, without my permission to hide someone else's secret, my daughter turned it into her favorite place in the house. A basement that held someone else's lies now holds my kids' bookshelf. I think that's the best renovation I've ever done. 0 permits required. I brought Dolores flowers the week everything was finalized, stood on her porch with a bouquet of grocery store daisies and a card that said, "Thank you for watching out for me, even when I didn't want you to." Dolores took the flowers, looked at them, looked at me, and said, "Sweetheart, I've been watching this street since before you were born. You're the first person who ever came back and said thank you." Then she invited me in for coffee and showed me 3 new entries in her notebook. Apparently, the family 2 doors down is getting a suspicious number of late-night deliveries. Dolores never stops. God bless that woman. My mother, Francine, never did formally apologize for the "how did you not know" comment. That's not how Francine works. But she started picking Phoebe up from school every Wednesday so I could leave work on time instead of rushing. She started bringing over meals on Sundays, casseroles, soups, her brisket that takes 4 hours and is worth every minute. She shows love through action, not words, and once I stopped waiting for the words, I could see the love just fine. Last week, Phoebe asked me what used to be in the cozy room before it was the cozy room. I told her it used to be storage, just boxes and old stuff. She thought about it for a second and said, "That's boring. It's way better now." Yeah, baby, it really is. Some people build their whole lives on keeping others in the dark. They count on your exhaustion. They count on your trust. And most of the time, it works because life is busy and people are tired, and who has the energy to go looking for lies they don't even know exist? But every now and then, you hire a guy to fix the yard, and he hears something he wasn't supposed to hear. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this one. If this story meant something to you, more of my stories are already right there on your screen. Tap 1 and I'll see you in just a moment. Take care of yourselves.
Hi, welcome to Healing Heart. Our community is more than 35,000 subscribers. Thank you. Enjoy my new story.
My mother sold my condo while I was lying unconscious on an operating table with my spine cut open. She pocketed $195,000, and by the time I woke up, $142,000 of it was already gone, spent on my little sister's wedding. I found out through a voicemail. Not even a phone call, a voicemail. And the worst part? My mom left it in the same sweet voice she uses to remind me to take my vitamins. My name is Madeline Walton. Most people call me Maddie. I'm 31 years old and I work as a veterinary technician at Palmetto Animal Hospital in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm the person who holds your nervous golden retriever while the vet gives the shots. I make decent money, nothing spectacular. I drive a 2016 Kia Sorento with a bumper sticker that says, "My dog is smarter than your honor student," and until very recently, I owned a 2-bedroom condo at Laurel Ridge Condominiums on Pelham Road. That condo was my whole life. I didn't buy it with some trust fund or a lucky break. My grandmother, Beverly Walton, left it to me when she passed 3 years ago. Grandma Beverly owned it outright. No mortgage, no liens, no debt. She also left me $22,000 in cash. My younger sister, Paige, got the same amount, $22,000. My mother, Gail, got nothing. And that wasn't an accident. See, Beverly knew her daughter-in-law. She loved Gail in the way you love someone you don't trust with a credit card. Beverly's will was specific. She left the condo to me because she believed I'd take care of it. She didn't leave property to Gail because, in Beverly's words, written right there in the will for everyone to read, she had concerns about Gail's financial judgment. That's polite legal language for "this woman will sell the furniture before the funeral flowers wilt." Paige blew through her $22,000 in 4 months. Clothes, a vacation to Cabo, a deposit on a BMW lease she couldn't keep up with. Nobody was surprised. My mother was furious. Not at Paige for wasting the money, but at Beverly for not leaving more. That's how things worked in my family. Paige could do no wrong, and the rest of us existed to make sure she didn't have to face consequences. I used my inheritance wisely. I renovated the kitchen, new countertops, a proper backsplash, fixed the garbage disposal that had been making a sound like a dying robot since 2014. I paid the property taxes, built an emergency fund, and lived within my means. That condo was the only real security I had in this world, and I treated it like it mattered, because it did. Now, let me tell you about the surgery. For 2 years, I'd been dealing with a degenerative disc in my lower back, L4 to L5 for anyone who speaks spine. It started as occasional stiffness, then became pain that woke me up at 3 a.m, then became the kind of pain where you cry in the shower because standing up feels like someone's twisting a screwdriver between your vertebrae. My orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Mehta, at Prisma Health Greenville Memorial, told me I needed a spinal fusion. 7 hours on the table, general anesthesia, titanium screws, 6 to 8 weeks of recovery, real risks, nerve damage, infection, the usual terrifying list they hand you on a clipboard. I was scared, genuinely, deeply scared. The kind of scared where you clean your apartment the night before because some irrational part of your brain whispers, "What if you don't come home?" The morning of the surgery, I was already in my hospital gown, sitting on the edge of that narrow bed with the paper sheet, waiting for the anesthesiologist. They'd given me midazolam. That's the sedative they use before they wheel you in. It makes you feel like your brain is wrapped in cotton. You can talk, you can sign your name, but your judgment is basically on vacation. That's when my mother showed up. Gail walked in with a travel mug of chamomile tea, my favorite, and a warm smile. She rubbed my shoulder and told me everything was going to be fine. Then she pulled out a small stack of papers. She said the nurse mentioned I should sign some medical forms just in case. A power of attorney so she could communicate with my doctors if anything went sideways during surgery. It sounded reasonable. I was about to be unconscious for 7 hours. Someone should be able to talk to my medical team. So I signed. My hands were shaky. My vision was a little soft around the edges, and the only thing I could really focus on was the fear of what was about to happen to my spine. I didn't read every page. I trusted my mother. What I signed was not a medical power of attorney. It was a general durable power of attorney, a document that gave Gail full authority over my finances, my property, my bank accounts, everything. I signed my home away because I was drugged, terrified, and I believed the one person who should have been protecting me. 7 hours later, I woke up. My throat was raw from the breathing tube. My back felt like it had been rebuilt with hardware from a construction site, which, technically, it had. My vision was blurry. My mouth was so dry I could have used my tongue as sandpaper. And there on the little rolling tray next to my hospital bed was my phone. 68 missed calls. 41 from my mother, 19 from Paige, 8 from numbers I didn't recognize. The morphine was doing its job on the surgical pain, but there's no dosage on earth for what I heard next. One voicemail from Gail, her voice cheerful, casual, like she was reminding me to pick up milk on the way home. "Maddie, honey, don't be upset, but we sold the condo. You were unconscious, so we signed the paperwork for you. It's for Paige's wedding. We'll explain everything when you're feeling better. Love you, sweetie." I played it twice because my brain couldn't process it the first time. Then I saw a text from a number I didn't know. "Hi, confirming the walkthrough for the new buyer tomorrow at 10 a.m. Can you leave the keys under the mat?" I was lying in a hospital bed. I couldn't sit up. I couldn't turn my head without feeling like my spine would snap in half. I had titanium screws holding my vertebrae together, and my mother had just sold my home. My grandmother's gift, my security, my independence, every single thing I'd built for $195,000 to pay for my sister's wedding. The tears came, and because I couldn't turn my head, they just rolled sideways into my ears. You know that feeling when your phone is blowing up and you know something terrible has happened before you even look? Multiply that by 1,000. That was my Tuesday evening at Prisma Health Greenville Memorial. But here's the thing about hitting absolute bottom while you're flat on your back in a hospital bed. There's a strange clarity that comes with it. When everything has been taken from you and you physically cannot move, your mind gets very, very focused. I picked up my phone. Slowly. My hands were still trembling from the anesthesia. I made one call. Not to my mother, not to Paige. I called my best friend, Josie Callahan. Josie and I had been close since our junior year at Clemson. She now worked as a senior paralegal at a real estate law firm in downtown Greenville. She picked up on the second ring. I whispered 4 words. My mom sold my condo. Josie said she'd be there in 30 minutes. She made it in 26. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one, and it means more to me than you know. Thank you. Now, where were we? Right. Josie Callahan walking into my hospital room like a woman who had already mentally filed 3 lawsuits before she found parking. Josie took one look at me, pale, hooked to a morphine drip, whispering because the intubation tube had turned my voice into something between a whisper and a squeaky door, and sat down without saying a word. I handed her my phone. She listened to the voicemail. She read the texts. She scrolled through the 68 missed calls, and I watched her face go through about 9 different expressions in 30 seconds, none of them good. Josie is a paralegal at Ostrowski & Fay, one of the top real estate law firms in Greenville. She spent 7 years reviewing property closings, title disputes, and deed transfers. So when she looked up from my phone and said very quietly that this wasn't a family disagreement, this was a felony, I believed her. She started taking photos. Every screen, every text, every call log. She photographed the voicemail transcript. She was building a file before I even finished explaining what happened. That's Josie. While most people say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Josie builds evidence folders. I love that woman. The next morning, I called my mother. Gail answered on the first ring, cheerful as a weather lady on a sunny Monday. She talked about the wedding like it was the most natural thing in the world. In her telling, what she'd done wasn't theft. It was family management. She told me the condo was just walls and a roof, and that I could stay with her until I found something new. She said family comes first, and then she said the line that cut deeper than anything. Beverly would have wanted this. Beverly. And my grandmother, who specifically, in writing, did not trust Gail with property. That Beverly would have wanted Gail to sell the condo Beverly deliberately left to me. The logic was so twisted, it could have qualified for a pretzel franchise. But Gail believed it. That's the part that's hard to explain to people who've never dealt with someone like my mother. She wasn't lying to manipulate me. She genuinely, truly, in her heart, believed she had the right to make this decision. In Gail's world, she is the family. She decides what's fair, what's needed, and who sacrifices for whom. And the person who sacrifices has always been me. Here's where the numbers get painful. Gail had sold the condo to a cash buyer for $195,000. The money went into a bank account she'd set up, not in my name, in hers. And in the approximately 19 hours between the closing and my waking up, she'd already committed $142,000 to Paige's wedding, $68,000 for the deposit at the Westin Poinsett in downtown Greenville, the venue Paige had been dreaming about since she saw it on some bridal Instagram page, $31,000 to a wedding planner named Renata, who apparently charges more per hour than my orthopedic surgeon, $18,000 for a custom designer wedding dress because off the rack wasn't good enough for my sister, who once returned a birthday gift from me because the ribbon was the wrong shade of teal, and $25,000 to a caterer for a menu that, I later learned, included a raw bar with imported oysters. $210,000, that was the total budget for this wedding. My entire condo. The thing my grandmother left me, the thing I'd spent 3 years maintaining and improving, cost less than Paige's reception. At least my condo came with working plumbing and didn't require a string quartet. The remaining $53,000 was earmarked for a 2-week honeymoon in Santorini and the rest of the vendor payments, all from the sale of my home, all authorized by a power of attorney I signed while sedated and terrified before spine surgery. But wait. It got worse. Gail didn't just sell the condo that day. She also went to my bank. the same day, same afternoon, between the notary's office and the hospital, and withdrew $3,800 from my personal savings account, using the same power of attorney, the florist deposit for the wedding. My mother went from stealing my home to emptying my savings to sitting at my bedside like a loving parent, all in one afternoon. That takes a level of compartmentalization I can't even comprehend. Then came the text from Paige, my little sister. 27 years old, hasn't held a job for longer than 5 months in her life, blew through her inheritance in one summer, didn't text me to ask if I survived a 7-hour surgery, didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't say, I hope you're okay. She sent me a message that said I shouldn't make this about me because this was her special day and that I could be her maid of honor to make up for it. She wanted me to stand in a blush pink dress at a wedding funded by my stolen home and smile for the photographer. I don't know what's more impressive, the audacity or the complete absence of self-awareness. Actually, I do know it's the audacity. And then I discovered something that made my blood go cold. I checked my hospital file. Josie helped me access it. Gail had listed herself as my emergency contact. Fine, that happens. But Gail had also been making decisions about my post-surgical care. She had contacted the hospital's discharge planning team and requested I be transferred to a cheaper rehabilitation facility, a place 40 minutes outside Greenville with mediocre reviews, to save on costs. Whose costs? She just pocketed $195,000 of my money, and she was trying to cut corners on my recovery. Josie helped me revoke Gail's access immediately. Every form, every authorization, everything. My mother's name was removed from every document at that hospital by 9 p.m. that night. I checked my bank accounts. Savings, wiped. Checking, $1,847. That was it. My entire financial existence. I had a $6,200 hospital copay coming, no income for 6 to 8 weeks of recovery, and I couldn't stand up without help. My mother had taken my home, my savings, my medical autonomy, and my ability to recover in peace, and she wanted me to wear blush pink and be grateful. Josie sat with me until midnight. Before she left, she said 5 words that I held onto like a lifeline. Don't call them. Don't text. Don't warn them about anything. Let me talk to Warren tomorrow morning. Warren was her boss, a real estate attorney with 32 years of experience. I lay there in the dark, listening to the beeping of hospital machines and the shuffle of night nurses in the hallway. And that's when the last piece clicked into place. Something I hadn't let myself see until that moment. 3 weeks before my surgery, Gail had started calling me almost daily, not to ask about my health, to push me to schedule the operation. Don't wait, honey. Your health is the most important thing. Dr. Mehta's office has an opening on the 14th. Take it. She was unusually insistent. At the time, I thought she was being caring for once. She wasn't being caring. She was setting a date. The buyer, the notary, the paperwork. She'd had all of it ready for weeks. She just needed me unconscious, and she pushed me toward the operating table to make it happen. My mother didn't just steal from me during my surgery. She engineered the timing of my surgery to steal from me. The wedding was in 13 days. I could barely whisper, but behind my silence, something was building that Gail Walton never planned for. I didn't sleep that night, partly because of the pain. Turns out titanium screws in your spine don't care about your emotional state. And partly because my brain wouldn't stop running the math on how thoroughly my own family had betrayed me. But also partly because the man in the room next to mine was snoring so loud I thought the wall was vibrating. Hospitals are many things. Quiet is not one of them. At 7:14 the next morning, Josie texted me, "Talk to Warren. He wants to help. Pro bono, he says this is textbook." 3 words. Pro bono. Textbook. Help. I read that text 6 times and cried for the 7th time in 12 hours. But this time, it was different. This time it felt like the first crack of daylight after the longest night of my life. Warren Ostrowski was 61 years old, a senior partner at Ostrowski and Fay, and he'd spent 32 years practicing real estate law in South Carolina. The man had seen every kind of property dispute, title fraud, and deed scam that exists, but this case was personal for him. His own mother had been financially exploited by his uncle years ago, a family situation that ended in court and permanently changed how Warren viewed trust within families. When Josie brought him my case, he didn't hesitate. Warren reviewed the documents Josie had photographed at my bedside. The POA, the texts, the voicemail transcript, the bank withdrawal confirmation, and within 2 hours he'd identified 5 critical legal problems with what my mother had done. 1. The power of attorney was obtained through deception. I was under sedation, believed I was signing medical forms, and was never told I was granting financial authority over my property. That's textbook fraud under South Carolina law. 2. Gail used the POA for a transaction that directly benefited herself and her other daughter. An agent under a power of attorney has a fiduciary duty to act in the principal's interest, not their own. Gail violated that duty so thoroughly she might as well have set it on fire. 3. Harold Fenn, the notary who handled the closing notarized documents that I never personally appeared for. Under South Carolina notary law, that's a violation that can void the entire closing. Harold was a 67-year-old semi-retired notary Gail found through a church friend. He'd handled the deal for $220, roughly 4 times the standard closing fee. He didn't verify my identity. He didn't call me. He didn't confirm the POA was legitimately obtained. He took the inflated paycheck, skipped every safeguard, and rubber-stamped a theft. 4. The sale price. My condo was appraised at $238,000 14 months before the surgery. Gail sold it for $195,000, $43,000 below market value, because she needed a fast cash buyer and she didn't care about getting fair price. It wasn't her money to lose. And 5, this was the one that changed everything. Warren discovered that Gail hadn't just used the POA to sign the closing documents. She had also created a separate document, a handwritten consent letter, supposedly from me, addressed to the buyer, confirming that I authorized the sale and was aware of the terms. My signature was on the bottom. I never wrote that letter. I never saw that letter. My mother forged it. This wasn't just POA abuse anymore. Under South Carolina law, forging a written instrument to facilitate a property transfer is forgery in the first degree. That's a felony carrying up to 10 years. Gail thought she was being thorough, covering her tracks with extra documentation. Instead, she manufactured the single most damning piece of evidence against herself. I almost felt something close to admiration for the irony. Almost. Warren's next call was to the title company that handled the closing. And here's where I learned that even corporations can accidentally become your allies when their money is on the line. The title company had flagged the transaction internally as unusual. The speed, the POA, the below-market price all raised eyebrows. But Harold Fenn had pushed it through, insisting everything was authorized. The title insurance company realized they were potentially liable for the entire transaction if the sale was fraudulent. Suddenly, they were very interested in helping void the sale. Nothing motivates a corporation faster than the possibility of writing a large check. Then Warren called the buyer. Glenn Sheehan was a 44-year-old real estate investor from Columbia, South Carolina. He'd paid $195,000 in cash for what he believed was a straightforward deal. A woman selling her condo quickly through a family representative. Glenn was no fool, but Gail had been convincing. She told Glenn I was relocating for a new job and wanted a fast, clean sale. Glenn was furious. Not at me, at Gail. His $195,000 was now trapped in a legally questionable transaction, and he'd been lied to from the start. He was ready to cooperate with anything and everything. And then Glenn told Warren something that stopped everyone cold. Gail had first contacted Glenn 3 weeks before my surgery. Not 1 week, not a few days, 3 full weeks. She had the property listing, the asking price, and the proposed closing date already mapped out. The closing date she'd given Glenn was the exact date of my operation. She had that date before I'd even confirmed it with the hospital. My mother hadn't just taken advantage of my surgery. She had arranged the entire deal in advance and then pushed me to schedule the surgery on a date that worked for her closing timeline. Every phone call, "Don't wait, honey. Your health comes first. Take the appointment on the 14th, was part of the plan. She used my medical fear, my trust, and my sedated state as tools in a real estate transaction she'd been engineering for nearly a month. I thought I'd already felt the worst of it. I was wrong. This was worse, because the woman who handed me chamomile tea before surgery and rubbed my shoulder and told me everything would be fine, that woman had already sold my home on paper. She was just waiting for me to go under so she could sign the last page. Then I got a phone call that made me laugh for the first time in days. My neighbor, Donna Litvak, 64 years old, retired postal worker, lived next door to me at Laurel Ridge for the past 3 years. Donna checks her Ring doorbell camera more often than most people check their blood pressure. The woman could run surveillance for the FBI and still have energy to bring you banana bread afterward. Donna called because a man had shown up at the condo with a measuring tape and started talking about gutting my kitchen, the one I'd personally renovated, the one with the new countertops. Donna had no idea I was selling because I wasn't selling, but she didn't know that yet. When I told her what happened, Donna went quiet for about 5 seconds. Then she said she had her Ring footage from the day of my surgery. Time-stamped video showing my mother entering my condo with Harold Fenn and a man she didn't recognize. That was Glenn Sheehan, while I was on an operating table having my spine rebuilt. Gail walked into my home, my grandmother's home, with a notary and a buyer, and sold it while I was unconscious. Donna said she'd testify to anything. She also pointed out something important. She had never seen me pack a single box, never seen movers, never heard me mention selling, because I hadn't. Her testimony would confirm that this sale happened without my knowledge or participation. By the end of that day, I had a veteran real estate attorney working pro bono, a title insurance company eager to cooperate, a buyer ready to testify, a neighbor with time-stamped video evidence, and a notary who'd cut every corner for a $2,200 payday. The pieces were falling into place faster than Gail had spent the money. Warren laid out the next steps: an emergency petition to void the sale, a Ellis Pendens to freeze the property, and a criminal report to the sheriff's office. I made my second important phone call that evening to the Greenville County Sheriff's Office and filed a report for forgery, fraud, and financial exploitation. 11 days until the wedding. Gail was picking out tablecloths. She had no idea that the ground beneath her was already crumbling. Day 3 after surgery, I was moved out of the ICU and into a regular recovery room, which in hospital terms meant I graduated from "we're really worried about you" to "you're probably fine, but we're keeping you just in case." I could sit up slightly. I could whisper without feeling like my throat was lined with sandpaper, and I could hold my phone long enough to read the updates Warren Ostrowski was sending through Josie. The legal machine was moving, and it was moving fast. Warren operated on 2 separate tracks, civil and criminal, and he explained the difference to me like this. The civil track was the scalpel, precise and immediate, designed to stop the bleeding and get my property back. The criminal track was the slow wait, the kind of pressure that builds over weeks and months until it crushes everything beneath it. We needed both. On the civil side, Warren filed an emergency petition with the Greenville County Court to void the property sale on grounds of fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. He filed a Ellis Pendens, that's a legal notice attached to the property that tells the entire world this condo is in dispute, and nobody can buy it, sell it, or transfer it until a court says otherwise. It's like putting a padlock on a deed. Within 48 hours, the court issued a temporary restraining order freezing the entire transaction. My condo wasn't going anywhere. On the criminal side, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office opened a formal investigation based on the report I'd filed. Their first interview was with Harold Fenn, the notary, and Harold folded like a lawn chair in a windstorm. Harold was 67, semi-retired, and absolutely not prepared for a detective sitting across from him asking about felony fraud charges. He admitted everything within the first 20 minutes. He confirmed that Gail paid him $2,200 for the closing, about 4 times the normal fee, specifically because she needed it done fast and quiet. He admitted he never contacted me, never verified my identity, never confirmed the POA was legitimately obtained. He said Gail told him I was in the hospital but had authorized everything, and he took her word for it because the money was good. Harold wasn't evil. He was lazy and greedy, which in legal terms can be just as destructive. He was now facing his own charges, and he was more than willing to say whatever the prosecution needed to hear about Gail Walton. Meanwhile, Glenn Sheeham, the buyer, was cooperating fully with Warren's civil case. Glenn had already hired his own attorney and filed a separate lawsuit against Gail for the return of his $195,000. My mother was now being sued from two directions simultaneously, and she didn't even know it yet. But Glenn gave us something more valuable than his cooperation. He gave us a timeline. During one of his conversations with Warren, Glenn mentioned that Gail had proposed the closing date to him 3 weeks before the surgery. Warren asked him to check his records. Glenn pulled up his emails and found the original message from Gail, dated 21 days before my operation, with the property address, the asking price, and a specific closing date that matched my surgery date exactly. Warren took that email, cross-referenced it with my hospital records, and confirmed something I had suspected but couldn't prove. Gail had the closing date before I'd even confirmed my surgery. She called Dr. Mehta's scheduling office, found out the available dates, then contacted Glenn with a closing date that matched. After that, she spent 2 weeks calling me, pushing me to take the appointment. "Don't wait, Maddie. Your health comes first. The 14th works. Just take it." She didn't schedule her fraud around my surgery. She scheduled my surgery around her fraud. When Warren told me this, I was sitting in my hospital bed eating lime jello, which, by the way, tastes exactly the way you'd expect something that color to taste. And I just set the spoon down and stared at the wall for about 3 minutes. There are levels of betrayal. Finding out your mother stole your home is one level. Finding out she orchestrated the timing of your medical procedure to facilitate the theft is something else entirely, something I don't think they've invented a word for yet. But Warren wasn't done digging. As part of building the civil case, he pulled historical financial records connected to my family. He was looking for patterns, prior behavior that would strengthen the argument that Gail's actions weren't impulsive, but habitual. And he found one. 9 years ago, when my father Robert died of a heart attack, Gail served as executor of his estate. The estate was small, some savings, a life insurance policy, and personal property. Among that personal property was my grandmother Beverly's jewelry collection, which Beverly had given to Robert years earlier, with the understanding it would eventually go to me. $14,000 worth of pieces, a sapphire ring, a pearl necklace, 2 gold bracelets that Beverly wore every Sunday to church. Those pieces were listed in the estate inventory. They were never distributed. Gail told me at the time that she couldn't find them and that they must have been misplaced during the move. I was 22, grieving my father, and didn't have the energy or knowledge to fight. I let it go. Warren didn't let it go. He pulled the estate records and found that the jewelry was inventoried, valued, and then simply disappeared from the paperwork. No transfer, no sale record, no explanation, just gone. $14,000 of my grandmother's legacy vanished under Gail's watch. That was 9 years ago. And now, here we were again. Same pattern, same target, same woman deciding that what belonged to Madeline Walton actually belonged to whoever Gail Walton decided needed it more. This discovery changed the legal landscape. It established a pattern of habitual financial exploitation, the same victim, the same perpetrator, over nearly a decade. Warren said this would significantly influence how the DA approached criminal charges. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was who Gail was. While all of this was happening, my mother continued living in a fantasy. Gail called me twice that week, leaving voicemails about the wedding. The planner had finalized the seating chart. The florist, paid for with my stolen $3,800, was doing white peonies and eucalyptus. And my personal favorite, Gail texted me a photo of bridesmaid fabric swatches with the message, The planner says blush pink for the bridesmaids. You'll look beautiful, honey. My mother sold my condo while I was having titanium screws drilled into my spine, and now she wanted me to wear blush pink and hold a bouquet at the wedding she'd paid for with the proceeds. At that point, honestly, why not ask me to give a toast too? I'd like to raise a glass to the happy couple, funded entirely by grand theft and forgery. The shrimp cocktail is excellent. It should be at $25,000. I didn't respond to any of it. Not a word. Josie and Warren had both told me the same thing. Silence is the most dangerous weapon when your enemy thinks you're powerless. Gail was counting on me to cry, complain, maybe write an angry text, and then eventually accept it. That's what I'd always done. That was the Maddie she knew. She didn't know the new one. On day 7, I was discharged from the hospital. I couldn't go back to my condo. It was still in legal limbo. So Josie took me to her guest room. She'd already set it up. Extra pillows for my back, a shower bench so I could bathe without twisting my spine, and a small stack of trashy romance novels she said were medically necessary for morale. I could walk with a walker, slowly, painfully, but I could move. Josie's friends, our friends, really, a group of women from Clemson and from the vet clinic, quietly organized a collection for my medical bills. No GoFundMe, no social media drama, just people who cared, passing the word. They raised $4,300 in 2 days. I sat on Josie's guest bed, reading the Venmo messages. "We've got you, Maddie, and hang in there, girl." And one from my coworker, Lena, that just said, "I hope your mother steps on a Lego every day for the rest of her life." And I cried again, but these were different tears. The next morning, Warren sent one final document, a formal legal notice, not a threat, just information, addressed to Lloyd and Janine Bergstrom, Trent's parents in Spartanburg. The notice stated, clearly and factually, that the funds used to plan their son's wedding were obtained through criminal fraud, that civil and criminal proceedings were underway, and that vendor payments made with stolen money could be subject to legal clawback 5 days until the wedding, and the Bergstroms were about to learn exactly who their son was marrying into. Lloyd Bergstrom was not a dramatic man. He owned 3 dry cleaning locations across Spartanburg. He drove a Ford F-150 he'd had for 11 years, and his idea of a wild Friday night was watching Clemson football with a bowl of chili. When Warren Ostrowski's legal notice arrived at the Bergstrom home, Lloyd didn't yell. He didn't call Gail. He didn't call Paige. He called his family attorney. The attorney's assessment took about 40 minutes and boiled down to one devastating paragraph. If Trent married Paige while she was connected to an active fraud investigation, any restitution judgments against Paige could potentially attach to marital assets under South Carolina's equitable distribution laws. The wedding wasn't just emotionally risky, it was financially dangerous. The attorney's recommendation was clear. Do not proceed until the criminal matter is fully resolved, which could take a year or longer. Lloyd sat Trent down at the kitchen table and showed him the legal notice. He didn't lecture. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just handed his son the papers and waited. Trent read them twice. Then he asked one question. Did Paige know? Lloyd didn't have the answer, but Trent knew who did. On day 10 after my surgery, Trent Bergstrom called me. It was the first time we'd ever spoken without Paige in the room or on the line. His voice was careful, almost cautious, like a man walking through a house he suspects might be on fire. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I told him facts. The voicemail, the POA signed under sedation, the $195,000, the 3 weeks of planning before my surgery, the forged consent letter, and Paige's text, the one that said, "Don't make this about you," while I was lying in a hospital bed 12 hours after having my spine reconstructed. Trent was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if there was proof Paige knew in advance. I told him about the text exchange between Paige and Gail from 3 weeks before the surgery. What if she doesn't sign? And Gail's response, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." The messages had been flagged during the investigation. They would eventually be used as evidence. Trent thanked me. His voice was flat, not angry, something worse than angry. Disappointed in a way that doesn't recover. He hung up. He didn't confront Paige that night. He drove to his parents' house and stayed there for 2 days. When Paige called, asking where he was, he told her he needed time to think. She asked what there was to think about. He said he'd call her when he was ready. On day 11, Trent called Paige. I don't know exactly what was said because I wasn't there and Trent isn't the type to broadcast private conversations. But Josie heard from Warren, who heard from the Bergstrom's attorney, that Trent told Paige the wedding was postponed indefinitely. He didn't scream. He didn't accuse. He said something along the lines of, he couldn't move forward right now, maybe not ever, and he needed to understand who he was about to marry. Paige's response was immediate and predictable. She called me, not to apologize, not to explain, to blame. She told me I had destroyed her life, that I was jealous, bitter, and selfish, that I had always resented her happiness, and this was my way of punishing her. The same script Gail had written years ago, the family playbook where I'm the villain for refusing to be the doormat. Paige had memorized every line. I let her finish. Then I said what I'd been holding in for 11 days. I told her that she knew exactly what Gail was planning, that she texted Gail 3 weeks before my surgery, asking what would happen if I didn't sign, that she never once called to ask if I survived a 7-hour operation, and that she offered me a bridesmaid spot at a wedding, funded with my stolen home, like it was some kind of consolation prize. Then I hung up. No dramatic monologue, no victory speech, just the quiet click of someone who's done explaining herself to people who never listened anyway. Gail called next, and for the first time, she wasn't cheerful. She was angry, furious, actually. She told me I had ruined Paige's chance at a beautiful life over a piece of real estate. She said I was being vindictive and ungrateful. She said family doesn't do this to family. I didn't argue with her. There's no point arguing with someone who commits a felony and genuinely cannot see the crime. I told Gail that she should talk to a lawyer, a real one, not Harold Fenn, because what was coming next wouldn't be a family conversation. Then I hung up on her too. Gail still didn't know the full picture. She thought this was a family argument, messy, emotional, but something that would eventually blow over the way it always had. She didn't know about the emergency petition. She didn't know about the Lis Pendens. She didn't know about Harold Fenn's cooperation with the sheriff's office. She didn't know about the forged consent letter that elevated her charges to first-degree forgery. She didn't know about the 9-year-old jewelry theft that established a pattern of exploitation. She was about to find out, but not from me, from a detective. 2 days later, a Greenville County Sheriff's investigator knocked on Gail's front door in Simpsonville. He wasn't there to arrest her. Not yet. He was there to formally interview her as the subject of a criminal investigation into forgery, fraud, and financial exploitation of a family member. Gail invited him in because she still believed she could explain her way out of anything. According to the detective's report, which Warren later obtained, Gail spent the first 15 minutes trying to explain that she had done what was best for the family and that Maddie would understand eventually. The detective listened politely and then presented her with a summary of the evidence: the fraudulent POA, the forged consent letter, Harold Fenn's full cooperation, Glenn Sheehan's testimony, the Ring doorbell footage, the bank withdrawal records, and the pre-surgery email chain proving the sale was arranged 3 weeks in advance. Gail stopped talking after that. Day 13. The date circled on Paige's calendar for 8 months. The Westin Poinsett Ballroom downtown, reserved and decorated in Paige's mind 1,000 times over. The raw bar with imported oysters, the string quartet, the designer dress, the Santorini honeymoon. None of it happened. There was no dramatic scene, no empty ballroom moment. The Westin booked a corporate event in the space that day, some insurance company's regional meeting. The caterer served a different client. The wedding planner, Renata, sent Gail an invoice for the cancellation fee and moved on to her next bride. Paige spent the day in her childhood bedroom in Gail's house. Trent spent it at his parents' place in Spartanburg, watching college basketball with his dad. Gail sat alone in her kitchen, looking at a stack of legal documents she was just beginning to understand. And I sat in Josie's guest room, eating takeout from a Thai place on Augusta Road, watching a nature documentary about octopuses. Did you know octopuses have 3 hearts? That felt oddly relevant. Some creatures are just built to survive things that should break them. The wedding was gone, but the story wasn't over. because the civil case, the scalpel, had done its job. Now it was time for the slow wait. If this story has meant something to you, I'd love it if you hit subscribe and leave a like. It's a small thing, but it truly keeps this channel going, and I'm grateful for every single one of you. 4 weeks after my surgery, the Greenville County Court officially voided the property sale. Every document Harold Fenn had notarized, every signature Gail had placed using the fraudulent power of attorney, every paper in that closing file, all of it declared null and void. My name was restored on the deed. My condo was mine again. The title insurance company covered Glenn Sheehan's immediate losses while the court processed the full restitution order against Gail. Glenn got his money back. He was the one innocent person in this entire mess who'd been dragged in by my mother's lies, and he deserved to come out whole. Last I heard, he bought a duplex in West Columbia and was doing fine. 6 weeks after surgery, I walked back into my condo for the first time, slowly, with my walker. It took me about 4 minutes to get from Josie's car to my front door, and every step sent a dull ache radiating through my lower back. But I made it. Donna Litvak was waiting in the hallway with a vase of sunflowers so big it looked like she'd raided an entire farmer's market. She'd been checking on the place while I was gone, watering my one surviving houseplant, picking up the mail, making sure the pipes didn't freeze during that weird cold snap Greenville had in late October. I stepped inside. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. My lavender candle still sat on the kitchen counter. My coffee mug was still in the drying rack. The throw blanket was still folded on the couch. Nobody had packed my things. Nobody had moved anything, because I never sold my home. My mother did, and the law brought it back. I stood in my kitchen, the one with the countertops I'd picked out myself, the backsplash I'd installed on a Saturday with Josie and a YouTube tutorial and a bottle of cheap wine, and I cried. Not the sideways hospital tears, real ones. The kind that come from getting back something you were sure was gone forever. But the criminal case was still moving, slowly, heavily, and with the kind of inevitability that Gail Walton never planned for. Harold Fenn was the first to fall, charged with notary fraud. His notary commission was revoked permanently by the state. 40 years of professional reputation, gone because he took $2,200 to skip every safeguard that existed to protect people like me. He faced a $15,000 fine and civil liability to Glenn Sheehan. Harold's wife, according to Donna's Neighborhood Intelligence Network, could barely look at him. I can't say I felt sorry for him, but I didn't celebrate either. He was a lazy man who made a greedy choice, and he paid for it. That's just math. Then came Gail. My mother was formally charged on a Tuesday morning, roughly 2.5 months after the surgery. Felony forgery in the first degree. Financial exploitation of a family member. 2 charges that carry a combined maximum of 15 years in South Carolina. A Greenville County Sheriff's deputy arrived at her home in Simpsonville at 7:45 a.m. She was arrested, transported to the detention center, booked, fingerprinted, and photographed. Her mugshot was taken under the same fluorescent lights that photograph everyone equally, the scared, the dangerous, the foolish, and the ones who still don't think they did anything wrong. Gail was released on bail the same day, but the damage was done. Her name was in the system, her fingerprints were in the database, and her face was in a file that would follow her for the rest of her life. Gail hired an attorney, a cheap one, because she'd spent most of the stolen money on imported oysters and eucalyptus centerpieces. Her attorney reviewed the evidence and delivered the kind of news that no amount of self-justification can soften. The case was overwhelming. The fraudulent POA, the forged consent letter, the one Gail had created as extra proof that became the single most incriminating document in the file. Harold Fenn's full cooperation, Glenn Sheehan's testimony and email records, Donna Litvak's time-stamped ring footage, the 9-year pattern of financial exploitation going back to the disappeared jewelry, the pre-surgery timeline proving the entire scheme was planned weeks in advance. Gail's attorney recommended a plea deal. Fighting this in trial would be expensive, public, and almost certainly result in a harsher sentence. The plea. guilty to felony forgery and financial exploitation, 3 years in state prison, 5 years of supervised probation after release, full restitution to Glenn Sheehan, permanent felony record, meaning Gail could never again serve as executor of an estate, trustee of a trust, agent under a power of attorney, or work in any school, childcare, or fiduciary capacity. A court-ordered restraining order prohibiting any contact with me. And the restitution. The court ordered the sale of Gail's house in Simpsonville, the family home, the house where she'd raised Paige and me. The house she'd controlled like her personal kingdom for 20 years. It sold for $187,000. The proceeds went to Glenn Sheehan's restitution. The woman who sold her daughter's home to fund a wedding lost her own home to pay for the consequences. Beverly would have called that poetic. I just called it overdue. Then the investigation reached Paige. Around month 4, the forensic review of Gail's phone records, standard procedure in fraud cases, uncovered the text exchange between Paige and Gail from 3 weeks before my surgery. Paige's message, "What if she doesn't sign?" Gail's response, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." 7 words from Paige. 7 words that proved she knew about the plan before it happened, asked about its potential failure, and continued to participate after receiving assurance it would proceed. The DA added Paige as a co-defendant, conspiracy to commit fraud. Paige received her charges by mail. Not a knock on the door, not handcuffs, just a plain envelope from the Greenville County Solicitor's Office sitting in her mailbox on a Thursday afternoon. I've often thought about that moment. Paige checking the mail, maybe expecting a catalog or a credit card offer, and pulling out the document that changed her life. No fanfare, just paper, her plea deal. 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a criminal record that would show up on every background check for the rest of her life. She was 27 years old with a felony conspiracy charge attached to her name. Trent Bergstrom formally ended the engagement around month 5. He didn't call Paige to do it. His attorney sent a letter. The ring was returned in the same envelope. No conversation, no closure, no final fight. He simply removed himself from her life the way you remove your name from a mailing list, quietly, completely, and without looking back. I heard later, through the Greenville grapevine that Donna Litvak monitors like a hawk, that Trent eventually started dating a pharmacist from Traveler's Rest who coached girls softball on weekends. Good for him. He wasn't the villain. He was just a decent man who almost married the wrong family. Paige lost everything. The fiancé, the wedding, the dress that still hung in plastic in a closet nobody opened, the Santorini honeymoon that existed only in a browser history. Her mother was going to prison. The family home, the only home she'd ever known, was sold by court order. Paige moved into a 1-bedroom apartment off Woodruff Road with a roommate she found on a housing app. She got a job as a hostess at a chain restaurant. She was 27, working for tips, splitting rent, and carrying a criminal record. The golden child had finally learned that gold doesn't protect you when you've helped someone steal it. As for me, I healed. Slowly. My spine got stronger every week. I walked without the walker by week 10. I went back to Palmetto Animal Hospital part-time after 8 weeks, then full-time by month 4. The first dog I treated when I came back was a 12-year-old beagle named Potato, who needed his teeth cleaned. Potato didn't care about my legal drama. He just wanted the treat I keep in my scrub pocket. Honestly, that was the best welcome back I could have asked for. I set up an automatic transfer, $50 per paycheck into a new savings account at a different bank. One name on the account, mine. No power of attorney for anyone ever again. I also got a proper will drafted by Warren Ostrowski, naming Josie Callahan as my executor, because here's something I learned the hard way, and I want to say it plainly in case it helps someone listening. Protect your assets in writing. Every document, every account, every piece of property. Make sure the only people with access are people who've earned your trust through actions, not just blood. Family is beautiful when it's honest, but a signature on the wrong document can cost you everything you have. Josie got promoted to senior paralegal after Warren told the partners how she'd handled my case from day one. Donna Litvak still checks her Ring camera 14 times a day, and I still bring her banana bread every second Sunday. She's the neighbor everyone deserves and almost nobody gets. I think about my grandmother Beverly sometimes, standing in this kitchen that she owned for 19 years before she left it to me. She saw what was coming. She wrote her will the way she did because she knew that Gail would do exactly this if given the chance. Beverly tried to protect me from beyond the grave, and in the end, she was right. The condo came back. It always belonged here. It always belonged to me. The people who call you selfish for having boundaries are almost always the ones who profit from you having none. And the most powerful thing you'll ever do is stop letting them. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this one. If you want more stories like this, there's one waiting on your screen right now, and I promise it's just as good. Click it and I'll see you there in just a second.